All right, our final panel of the day, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, is going to focus even more of a deeper dive here on VA.gov, the redesign that occurred there, and how that is going. So who we're going to have for the final panel, it's going to be moderated by our managing editor, Amy Kluber, who can join me here. She'll be joined by Charles Worthington, the Chief Technology Officer for the VA, Andrew Fichter, Product Owner, Lighthouse API Platform, and then Lauren Alexanderson, VA.gov Health Product and Design Lead.
I lost my
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, both in person, standing, and also on live stream. Mike introduced the panelists, so I'll just get right into it. We're going to be talking about the VA.gov initiative, as well as Atlas and some of the cool things going on with mobile and telehealth. So I want to ask all of you guys, how is technology helping VA improve the veteran healthcare experience? And we can go ahead and start with Charles.
Well, I think that the healthcare experience, something is really changing in the way patients think of healthcare. Healthcare is not something that just happens every couple hours that you visit a doctor and then the rest of your life it's not a thing, right? Increasingly, healthcare is something that we're thinking about more and more. Maybe just by show of hands, who's currently wearing some sort of health-related device like an Apple Watch or a heart rate monitor, some other sort of tracker? There's things like glucometers, sleep trackers. More and more people are taking their healthcare into their own hands. And in the rest of the industry, the use of online technologies, mobile devices, has really changed the way we interact with service providers, and that's definitely happening in the healthcare space. We're lucky to have Lauren here, who has been leading a lot of the work to take advantage of some of these advances to deliver a better digital healthcare experience. So I don't know if, Lauren, you want to talk about some of the specific things we've worked on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charles. Yeah, I think one of the things that has come up a lot in the VA in the last couple of years is really realizing that we need to meet veterans where they are. Healthcare is not, as Charles just alluded to, going to a facility anymore and getting care and leaving and going home. But really, we need to reach out and meet veterans where they are. And that has manifested, of course, in the Mission Act and trying to sort of enable veterans to get care in their community. But it has also manifested in things like telehealth, right? We're expanding rapidly the way that we're delivering care in digital ways. And it's a lot about self-service. How do we enable veterans to do as much of the healthcare, such as scheduling an appointment online or secure messaging their doctor, doing a chat with a doctor to triage a problem before necessarily having to go into an appointment. So we're doing a lot of work in sort of helping veterans navigate the healthcare space, both digitally and then in person as well.
VA has been a leader and is a leader in telehealth. I think last year we did 2.3 million telehealth encounters with nearly 1 million individual patients, and that's one of the biggest numbers you'll hear of any healthcare provider. We're really looking at a continuum of care, as Lauren said, meeting patients everywhere from a VA hospital, very traditional model, but also increasingly pushing forward with this concept of anywhere to anywhere. So where a clinical provider could be anywhere in the country and they could deliver care to a veteran that is anywhere in the country, and using technology and the internet make that connection possible. We've also got some cool stuff that's happening in between those things, right? So a lot of people are more comfortable kind of going into a clinical setting, but if you live in somewhere very rural, as over 5 million veterans live in a rural area, there isn't necessarily a clinical setting, certainly not a VA, but maybe not even a good clinical setting anywhere nearby. And so there's a really cool project that our colleagues in the Connected Care Office have been pushing forward called the Project Atlas, which is basically repurposing places where veterans are already visiting, things like a VFW post or a Walmart, places that are in their community. We've retrofitted with this sort of personal clinical type experience where a veteran can arrive and have a healthcare appointment in a setting that sort of feels like a doctor's office, but there's no VA staff present except the clinician on the other end of the telehealth screen. So there's some really cool stuff happening across the VA to basically try to meet veterans where they are, and I think that's a huge opportunity using digital to improve healthcare outcomes.
Some of those things might include the decision support tool and things like APIs. Can you go into that a little bit, Andrew?
Yeah, so speaking of meeting veterans where they are, Just yesterday, it was officially announced the launch of the MVP of the Health API, which integrates with the Apple iPhone Health app. So that allows veterans to see all of their information on the iPhone very easily, like immunizations, procedures, vital signs, conditions, and that's very exciting. We've already had over 3,000 veterans register to see that information. So that's very exciting, and credit to the team here. I know Jason Glanville has done a lot of work. He's led that effort with the Health API, so it was very exciting to see that launch yesterday. And then we also have things, as mentioned, the decision support tool. So we will have API supporting that also to help verify eligibility for veterans to receive community care.
Great. So how is VA leveraging existing technologies? You mentioned telehealth. Can you go into a little bit more about the technologies behind that?
Well, I think the looking for ways to repurpose things we've already built is a key thing that we're focused on in IT. I think Jim and Dom probably both mentioned this, the push to the cloud, the push towards DevOps. Part of that is to try to use the same bits and pieces that we have to deliver one capability to deliver other things as well. So a couple concrete examples of that. The same infrastructure that we're using to deliver telehealth medical appointments, we are expanding to soon be offering video visits for hearings for our Board of Veterans Appeals. And that's something that the board has been very progressive in for a long time. But that same concept of anywhere to anywhere, where a veteran that's got an appeal hearing for their appeal doesn't necessarily have to drive to a regional office to have that hearing, but could instead stay either at their home or somewhere they feel comfortable with an internet connection and talk to their judge and have the hearing virtually. We're delivering those capabilities, working on that, using the same infrastructure that delivers healthcare appointments. And that's, I think, one of the benefits of having this IT capability that's sort of central and shared by all of VA. And certainly the APIs as well, that's another example where the same tools that we're building to support clinician use cases, VA use cases, then can be exposed to third parties that could build things on top of those APIs to better support veterans as well. So it's not just the VA that needs to invest in building these capabilities, but instead we can enable this whole ecosystem of innovators that can build great products on top of what we've already created.
Going off along that, public-private partnerships, they're incredibly important. We hear about that almost on a daily basis. How do industry partners support VA's innovation? Specifically, how have those partnerships driven some of these successes?
Yeah, so I can speak a lot to, we've been doing a lot of work in the benefits space. So trying to streamline the process of veterans applying for and getting a benefits decision. So disability compensation, for example, was a big one. The vast majority of benefits applications are for disability compensation. Right now, that's a weeks-long process to get a decision, and there's many touch points in that process. And we're starting to slowly address those touch points. And the one that we've already addressed is at the very front. How does a veteran submit their application to the VA? Before we launched the benefits intake API, there was no way for a veteran to, or for VSOs to digitally submit applications to the VA. So with the benefits intake API, we've integrated with a lot of veteran service organizations, or with software vendors that sell their software to veteran service organizations. And they've been able to integrate with our API and allow veteran service offices to digitally submit applications to the VA. And so that's saved days at the front end of the process. We're also working on addressing later parts of the process too, specifically getting claims into the Veterans Benefits Management System, which is our software that we use to process claims. So right now, once a claim is digitally submitted to VA, it still has to go through processing in the mail portal to get into the Veterans Benefits Management System, and so we're looking at taking that step out too. And so earlier this summer we launched our Claims Establishment API, which will automatically establish disability compensation claims digitally in VBMS, and then save even more time. And so currently we're working with industry partners to integrate with that API.
This is really cool. I mean, something I was very surprised by when I joined was basically this stat. I guess, if you had to guess, what percentage do you think of these forms would VA receive as paper or fax? Any guesses? 3 or 4%? Right, and then I think I heard 80%, right? It's closer to 80%, over half. It's something like 60% of disability compensation forms VA currently receives as fax or paper. And of course, it's hard for us to work with that, right? We've got the very first step of the process then becomes, managing this paper, getting it digitized, putting it into our digital systems. But the crazy thing we learned by talking with these veteran service organizations, sort of applying this human-centered design practice, was that a lot of these VSOs that help veterans create their claims, they were using software to create those claims. So, a veteran would walk into an office, the VSO would be helping them develop a claim, they'd be typing it all in, but at the very end of that process, instead of like TurboTax, it's send to the IRS, what their software did was download and print, or download and fax to the VA, because that was the most reliable, easiest way to get the claim to the VA. And so what Andrew's team has done is basically created that TurboTax-like experience for those software vendors, where now at the end of that claim process, they can click a button that says, send this to the VA, and we receive it. And we've seen great monthly growth of that. It launched a little over a year ago with a couple hundred submissions a month. I think last month in September it was over 15,000 submissions came in using this API. So we're seeing a huge amount of interest from our industry partners in wanting to interact with the VA in new ways. And I think the API program is a great opportunity to leverage that excitement.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on what Charles was saying, we've now integrated with the key players in the software space that sells software to veteran service offices. So we have seen great adoption, and that's why we've seen such great growth, because just over the past few months, we've really onboarded a few more software vendors. And then also we've done, just speaking a little bit to the human-centered design that we do, we've been doing a lot of research to see how we can improve our API that's already out there. So we've been talking to veteran service officers, to claims processors, understanding their workflow a lot better, and understanding what we can do with the API to address their pain points. And we've gotten tons of great quotes and insights as part of that research. One of my favorite quotes is that we heard one office actually used to have over a dozen file cabinets because they would be printing out the PDFs, as Charles mentioned, from their software. They would be faxing it to the VA, and then they have to archive it in a file cabinet. One interview subject said that they actually now only have one file cabinet thanks to our API. They're no longer printing all this paper out and archiving it physically. And it just saves them a ton of time, too.
Trees.
Just the act of, yeah, trees, yeah. And then just the act of having to fax is painful, because they would have to stand by the fax machine, wait and make sure that the fax successfully went through. If it didn't, then they would have to try again. I mean, so you imagine a veteran service officer, you're dealing with tons of veterans, and you want to make sure that they're getting quick service. And the more time you're spending standing at a fax machine and printing out paper and filing it, the less you're actually helping veterans. So we've seen great benefits with that.
Great environmental benefits, apparently. So cloud strategy, we hear about that government-wide. How does VA's cloud strategy enhance specifically the veterans' experience?
I would say that it's one of the biggest benefits of using the cloud is the speed at which we can deliver things. And so, the teams that Lauren helps lead are shipping improvements to VA.gov literally every business day. We're deploying changes to production every day. And that would really only be possible with some of these emerging technologies that basically let you script out the whole deployment and operations process. And so I think the speed of change is one of the greatest benefits that we get from the cloud. There's also really cool features. When the team is working on a new feature, they can deploy a branch that they're working on with that feature, and it will build the entire application just for that one developer that's working on that branch. So they can see what their new feature looks like on this private little instance of VA.gov that was just created based on what they had written. And that would never be possible if we were still working in a traditional sort of data center model where every change had to be kind of manually implemented. It would be far too difficult and expensive to let every developer test out what they were doing on their own private little instance of VA.gov. But now we can do that because we have these technologies. So I think that's really enabled the speed. And Lauren, I don't know if you want to talk about the online scheduling work to make that work better, but you've done a lot of work using the cloud to improve the online appointment scheduling process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what we have been trying to do is take out the requirement for veterans to need to hit dead ends. And so we've been sort of working a lot through the online scheduling process. And one of the things that's actually great about the cloud, right, is that we can deploy something and get it tested in front of veterans like tomorrow. So I can get something up and I can get people actually interacting with a real thing. And that gives me a really good sense of how it's going to work and whether I'm actually delivering software and technology that works well with veterans. It also comes up a lot when we're trying to do things and testing around accessibility and making sure that the products that we're testing, we're not just sort of doing the standard government 508 check, but we're actually really testing with veteran users who are using assistive devices. So we are able to tell for sure that someone using JAWS is actually able to navigate through our website and navigate to log in and all of these different features. And is it not just like it's bare minimum, is it usable? Is it an enjoyable experience for them too? That's a really important process. And the cloud has also enabled us to create a design system that we're able to allow different teams across the VA to use. So if they want to try to, instead of having to reinvent the wheel, what is a button going to look like on every different website? What is a thing going to look like on every different website? We've taken the US web design system and then we've adapted it for the VA's purposes. So done an additional work around making sure that it is extra accessible to veterans and that we've thought about all of the color contrast and everything, and that is a product that then anyone can go use and sort of adapt the code and be able to apply it to different sites.
And I actually have a direct example of that. Developer.va.gov, we recently launched a redesign of that using the design system, and it looks great. And that's just a perfect example of that in action. I think it looks beautiful. I think it looks on par with some of the better looking websites that you go to.
I think the importance of design can't be overstated, and it's not just making something look nicer. It actually really does have results, and that's something we're very focused on. Is what is the impact of the changes we're making, and so using some of these tactics that Lauren has talked about with the new VA.gov platform, we've really seen the usage of these tools increase, in some cases, pretty dramatically. It was 1 year ago today that we launched the new VA.gov, and I think the slide here has a few of the results. But in some ways, these capabilities already existed, but they were hard to find and hard to use. And so by modernizing them, making them easier to use, and making it possible for people to get to them from the single VA.gov front door, we've seen big increases in the usage of these tools. Disability claims, for example, the use of electronic disability claims is up 27% this year compared to the same time last year. And so every disability claim that's submitted to the VA digitally, it avoids that whole paper process to begin with. It gets straight into our systems and it can begin being developed immediately. Pension submissions, burial submissions, all of these things are showing great increases. And one that I'm really excited about is the profile updates. This is a pretty new capability that we've worked on in partnership with the Veteran Experience Office to make it possible for a veteran to basically update their information with the VA in just a single place and have that update go to the whole rest of the VA that needs it. Which sounds pretty simple, but if you can sort of imagine how the VA grew up over the years with each administration creating its own software systems, in many cases, decades ago, those systems were not designed to talk to each other. And so if you updated your mailing address at one VA medical center, it wasn't necessarily the case that mailing address change would make it to your disability compensation, for example. Now there's one system that can kind of synchronize those updates, and we've made it possible for veterans to log in and see what VA has on file for them in terms of their mailing address, their phone number, their email address, and let them change that online. So they can pull up exactly what our staff sees, and they can change it if it's wrong. And you can see we've had over 500,000 people have made an update to their profile, and that feature has grown tremendously. It's almost 5 times more since the VA.gov launch than it was before that. So we've seen a lot. Not just we can just say it works better, it's better designed, but what really matters is the numbers, and we've seen that work with VA.gov. I think Barbara mentioned probably the most important number is the customer satisfaction score, and we have seen a big increase there. The customer satisfaction score for VA.gov increased by 5 full points which probably doesn't sound like a lot, but that represents the single biggest increase of a federal agency main web page over that same time period. So we're seeing the results that tell us that we're on the right track with these enhancements.
Well, on the topic of speed and, of course, the user experience, where does something like 5G come into play in terms of getting that up to speed? And
yeah, I mean, I think that so 5G obviously is just a faster way to get mobile internet. So I think what we're going to see, we're already seeing this, but that will create more demand among our patient population for these highly interactive modalities. So things like telehealth. It'll be a lot easier to do a telehealth appointment if you've got 5G on your mobile device, more reliable. And so what that means for us in IT is we need to make sure that the VA systems and networks are capable of handling this sort of influx of requests from the outside. So I think that's probably the single biggest impact that we'll see to 5G.
what other innovations are you excited about? We heard a bunch already. But with the release of the new iOS app yesterday, that's big news. Is there anything else that is on the horizon, or what work is left to do?
A lot.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's quite a lot to do. There are a bunch of changes coming up in healthcare in the next year, and I think we're doing our best to keep this trend of sort of making sure that veterans are at the center of all of those and that they are driving that experience. I think one of the changes I'm excited about, though, is actually a change from within of the VA, and that is the idea of really making human-centered design part of every single IT contract, at a part of every single product and project. And I've been teaching a couple of these classes that OIT has been putting on for different staff and sort of piloting, and we test everything. I joke not, right? Like, we even test our own classes and iterate on those and improve on those. But it's a really important point to think about. If every health product, if every digital product across the VA that was veteran facing, or even internal facing but services veterans, right, could be designed with those users, with their feedback, with the outcomes in mind of what we're trying to achieve with that, as opposed to a sort of list of very minuscule requirements. What is the North Star of that application, and how are we delivering on that, and are you making sure that the users of that application are going to use it? I think we're well past the point of where we can say if we build it, they will come. That's not true. Veterans have lots of other options of places that they can go. Users have lots of options of other alternatives of things that they can use. So we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we're delivering on that. And by making VA staff recognize that you yourself as an individual doing product development, doing engineering, doing any role that you have a role in doing user-centered design. You can literally ask your colleagues to look at something. You can ask veterans to look at something and get their feedback and continually improve on it, as opposed to waiting until the day before you launch, flip on the switch, and hope that it works.
Yeah, and as Lauren said, I mean, there's so much there. I mean, just in my experience, even before coming to VA, I mean, I've seen so many tools developed kind of in a backwards way, right? Where you're trying to check a box, you're building requirements, you have this really firm, rigid set of requirements that you're building to, and you're not really designing with the users, and then you release this tool, and then people don't like it. Then they start complaining about it, right? So I mean, doing user research and taking that approach to building products that you know that they'll use, and you're addressing their problems and pain points, is so important. And like on the Lighthouse platform, we have an amazing user experience team that's helped us with that. I mean, I think just over the last couple months, we've done in the magnitude of 10, probably 20 to 30 interviews with users of our APIs, and it's just super helpful and enlightening to see. And the question of what next? What do we do next to innovate? I mean, in an organization as large as the VA, that's a really challenging question to answer. And doing all this user research really helps drive some of those answers, right? I know, like in the benefits space, just through the research we've done, we've kind of been able to answer questions about what to focus on next, what would provide the greatest benefit. So it's been a really fun experience, and I think unique to government, doing this kind of product-minded approach.
Yeah, I think we've got the right team in place to really create. Our goal is to create a world-class digital experience that's on par with anything a veteran would receive interacting with a private sector service provider. And I think in a lot of ways, we've made a ton of progress. VA already, in many ways, leads the industry in terms of healthcare digital experience. So we want to maintain that leadership position. One other kind of focus that I have with wearing the CTO hat is to ensure that we are quickly adopting emerging technologies as they sort of hit mainstream. And so one sort of exciting area I think that we spend a lot of time on is basically the building of models that will allow the creation of artificial intelligence, which sounds a lot like buzzwords, but is basically, I think, the simple way to describe artificial intelligence is increasing what a computer is capable of doing that previously required a human. And we have a few of these small use cases in production today. And so we're trying to make a platform within VA IT that makes it possible for our VA staff members to create these models more easily. But we're already seeing a lot of this, a lot of the promise of this. One partnership we announced last year was with the DeepMind company, part of Google. They just published the results, the first wave of results from that initiative in Nature earlier this summer. And basically they proved that using machine learning against VA's unique medical data, they could create an algorithm that was successful at predicting the onset of acute kidney injury 48 hours before it happened, 90% of the time in the most severe cases. These sort of events, deterioration events, traditional medicine, we focus on kind of treatments, but using these new techniques, new statistical techniques, we're developing new procedures that were not really possible to be created before. So some of these new statistical techniques combined with VA's data, combined with easier access to computing power, I think have the potential to deliver a lot of really exciting advancements in the healthcare industry. And VA is leading in that, and I think we will continue to lead if we're successful.
We are down to our last 30 seconds, but I wanted to open it up to anybody if they had any questions for our panelists.
Well, I mentioned our collaboration with DoD on some of this.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that we have been doing is, so as part of you might have heard this little thing called Cerner, and it's an effort across both VA and DoD to try to revolutionize how we deliver healthcare and modernize our electronic health records. But what the thing that the DoD and VA partnership together brings is the idea that there's a whole of life experience, right? A veteran is is at one point a service member, or maybe they are in the reserves for a while, and their healthcare documentation lives over there, lives in those set of filing cabinets, and then at some point someone needs to get a cart and wheel the filing cabinets down across the bridge and down the street over to the VA, and that experience is a little bit disruptive. And so what we've been working with on the DoD and the VA is to try to make sure that we're creating as much of a seamless experience in the handoff of health records, and so that a veteran will be able to go to one front door, just as they do with VA.gov, and be able to get all of their information in one place.
That's all the time we have. Thanks so much. That concludes our programming. We'll be around. I'm sure there's coffee and food, and if these guys can hang out just for a little bit, maybe you guys can tag up with them. So thank you.